With the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in the middle of the 19th century, North American geopolitics underwent a profound change. Signed on February 2, 1848, this historic pact ended the Mexican-American War and fundamentally altered the map of the continent. After its forces were soundly defeated and its capital fell, Mexico was compelled to enter into peace talks with U.S. envoy Nicholas Trist. What is now California, Nevada, Utah, most of Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and a part of Wyoming were among the astounding 55% of Mexico's territory that the treaty required Mexico to give up to the United States. Mexico also acknowledged the Rio Grande to be the border and gave up claims to Texas. The United States agreed to resolve claims against Mexico by American citizens in return for this enormous territory and paid Mexico $15 million. Those Mexicans living in the cessions were given the option of moving inside Mexico's new boundaries or obtaining American citizenship. Why, though, did Mexico consent to such severe terms? How did the futures of the two countries get shaped by this treaty? And how would the people who lived in these recently acquired American territories fare in the long run? Along with ending war, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo created the conditions for future upheavals and protracted hostilities. The seismic territorial loss began in 1821 when Mexico gained independence from the Spanish Empire. Present-day California, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas were among the enormous swaths of territory that Mexico inherited following the War of Independence. Ever since it became independent of the Spanish Empire in 1821, Mexico had claimed enormous disputed lands. Parts of these lands had been taken from American Indian tribes by the Spanish during the previous 3 centuries. However, strong and independent indigenous tribes persisted in dominating the northern parts of Mexico long after Spanish and then Mexican control. It was hard to support big populations in this largely arid and rough northern region. About 80,000 Mexicans were residents of California, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas in the middle of the 1840s, particularly in Nevada, southern and western Colorado, and Utah. The numbers decreased even more. Then, on March 1, 1845, US President John Tyler signed a law that became operative on December 29, 1845, annexing the Republic of Texas. Never having acknowledged Texas's independence, the Mexican government forewarned that this annexation would be interpreted as a war crime. Other geopolitical conflicts, such as the Oregon boundary issue between Great Britain and the United States, added to the high tensions even after the United Kingdom and France acknowledged the Texas's sovereignty and tried to talk Mexico out of going to war. On November 10, 1845, President James K. Polk dispatched envoy John Slidell to Mexico in a last-ditch attempt to prevent war. Slidell offered to buy the territories of Nuevo Mexico for $5 million and Alta California for up to $40 million. Slidell was refused to meet by the Mexican government, which had cut diplomatic ties earlier that year in part over disagreements over the Adams-Oney Treaty of 1819. Mexico believed it had inherited rights from this treaty, in which the United States renounced forever all claims to Spanish territories. With diplomatic efforts exhausted, war seemed inevitable. Polk secured the Oregon Treaty with Britain on June 15, 1846, freeing the US to focus on Mexico. Hostilities began with the Thornton Affair on April 25, 1846, when Mexican forces attacked an American patrol in disputed territory, resulting in American casualties and prisoners. This incident provided Polk with the justification to push Congress for a declaration of war, which was signed on May 13, 1846. In turn, the Mexican Congress issued its own war declaration on April 23, 1846, officially plunging both nations into a conflict that would ultimately redefine their borders. US forces swiftly moved beyond Texas, conquering Alta California and New Mexico. The fighting there ended on January 13, 1847, with the signing of the capitulation agreement at Campo de Cahuenga and the suppression of the Taos Revolt. By mid-September 1847, US troops had invaded central Mexico and occupied Mexico City. Amid the occupation, some Eastern Democrats called for the complete annexation of Mexico. Notably, a faction of Mexico's leading citizens even invited General Winfield Scott to become a dictator after his capture of Mexico City, a proposition he declined. However, this annexation movement lacked widespread support. In his December 1847 State of the Union address, President Polk reaffirmed Mexican independence and clarified that the ongoing military operations were aimed at securing a treaty to cede California and New Mexico, possibly extending to Baja California, and transit rights across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Despite a series of defeats, the Mexican government was hesitant to relinquish California and New Mexico. Even with Mexico City under US occupation, Mexican leaders believed that they had a stronger negotiating position than the military situation suggested. This belief was partly based on the assumption that the US was deeply divided over the war, and that there was no desire for outright annexation of Mexico. Furthermore, Mexico's abolition of slavery in 1829 and the growing anti-slavery sentiment in the US led Mexican leaders to hope they could leverage northern and southern US interests against each other. The Mexican government proposed peace terms, offering only the sale of Alta California north of the 37th parallel, while recognizing Texas's independence and insisting on the Nueces River as the boundary. These terms aimed to exploit the sectional divide in the US, hoping to provoke conflict within the Union. However, the terms instead incited widespread indignation in the US without achieving the desired sectional strife. Advised by Jefferson Davis, President Polk understood that any Mexican commissioners sent to the US would likely be overthrown and labeled traitors. Thus, the only hope for peace was to have a US representative negotiate in Mexico. Nicholas Trist, chief clerk of the State Department, eventually negotiated a treaty with the Mexican delegation, despite being recalled by Polk out of frustration. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed on February 2, 1848 by Nicholas Trist for the US and by Luis G. Cuevas, Bernardo Couto, and Miguel Atristain for Mexico at the Old Basilica of Guadalupe. This treaty, concluded as US forces occupied Mexico City, marked a significant and final shift in territorial control, solidifying the massive land loss for Mexico and reshaping North America's geopolitical landscape. While Mexico ceded Alta California and Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo carefully avoided addressing the core disputes that had sparked the war. It sidestepped the contentious issues surrounding the 1836 revolution that established the Republic of Texas, Texas's boundary claims extending to the Rio Grande, and the Republic of Texas's right to arrange its 1845 annexation by the United States. Instead, Article 5 of the treaty precisely described the new US-Mexico border. Starting at the Rio Grande, the border followed the river northwest from its mouth to the southern boundary of New Mexico, then due west to the 110th meridian, north along this meridian to the Gila River, and down the river to its mouth. To eliminate any ambiguity, a straight line was drawn from the mouth of the Gila to a point just south of the port of San Diego. The resulting border adjustments meant Mexico lost about 55% of its pre-war territory. The United States gained an area known as the Mexican Cession, encompassing present-day California, Nevada, Utah, most of Arizona, western New Mexico, western Colorado, and a corner of Wyoming. This cession did not include any territory east of the Rio Grande, nor did the territorial claims of the Republic of Texas extend west of the Rio Grande. The treaty included Articles 8 and 9 to protect the property rights of Mexican citizens in the ceded territories. However, the United States often failed to honor these assurances, leading to long-standing land disputes. The US also agreed to assume $3.25 million in Mexican debts to US citizens, equivalent to $114.5 million today. Residents of the ceded territories were given a year to choose between American or Mexican citizenship, with over 90% opting for American citizenship. Those who chose Mexican citizenship either moved to what remained of Mexico, whether they were granted land, or in some cases, particularly in New Mexico, stayed and retained their Mexican citizenship. Article 12 required the United States to pay Mexico $15 million, equivalent to $530 million today, in annual installments of $3 million. This payment was in consideration of the vast territorial gains made by the US. One particularly important provision for Mexico was Article 11, which obligated the US to prevent and punish Indian raids into Mexico. The US was also supposed to prohibit Americans from acquiring property stolen by the Indians during these raids and to return any captives. Mexico believed the US had previously encouraged such raids, so this article was seen as a significant promise of relief. However, Article 11 proved unenforceable. Indian raids continued despite a strong US military presence, leading Mexico to file 366 claims for damages between 1848 and 1853. The provision was ultimately annulled in 1853 with the Treaty of Massilia, part of the Gadsden Purchase. The land acquired through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo became a significant part of the United States, forming all or part of 9 states between 1850 and 1912. California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona emerged directly from this territory. Texas, which joined the Union in 1845, included parts of what would become Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. The total domain acquired, according to the Federal Interagency Committee, spanned 338,680,960 acres, costing $16,295,149, about 5 cents an acre. The Gadsden Purchase of 1853 further extended U.S. territory, adding the southern parts of New Mexico and Arizona for an additional $10 million, equivalent to $290 million today. This land was intended for a transcontinental railroad, which was not completed until 1881 due to the Civil War. The Southern Pacific Railroad eventually fulfilled this purpose, solidifying the economic value of the acquisition. The treaty recognized the Rio Grande as the boundary between Texas and Mexico. The land boundaries were established by a survey team of Mexican and American representatives, and their work was published in 3 volumes as the United States and Mexican Boundary Survey. The initial border markers, increased from 6 to 53 by agreement in 1853, were mostly simple piles of stones. Later conventions in 1882 and 1889 clarified the boundaries further, as some markers had been moved or destroyed. Photographs documenting the markers are preserved in the National Archives. The southern border of California was carefully designated to ensure the United States received San Diego and its excellent natural harbor, drawing a line from the junction of the Colorado and Gila rivers westward to the Pacific Ocean, passing just south of San Diego Bay. The treaty granted U.S. citizenship to Mexicans in the newly acquired territories, a significant legal and social shift, as this citizenship was extended before many African Americans, Asians, and Native Americans were eligible. Mexicans had 1 year to declare their citizenship, otherwise they could remain Mexican citizens but would have to relocate. Between 1850 and 1920, the U.S. Census counted most Mexicans as racially white. The United States gained the territories of Alta California and Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico, which now comprise parts of Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. Although vast, these lands were sparsely populated, mainly by indigenous Americans rather than white Americans or Mexicans. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo reshaped the continent, but its legacy continues to influence us today. How did these new borders impact lives and shape modern US-Mexico relations? Stay tuned for more. Like, subscribe, and keep watching for intriguing stories and deep political insights.